Oh, baby. It's You're All Doomed, the podcast that is rebooting its way through the killer cut of 2009's Friday the 13th, 13 minutes at a time. I'm Greg, and I have two of the same initials as GPS.
And I'm Brian.
And this segment of the movie opens on a red-tinged New Line Cinemas logo and concludes on a couple of people approaching a very run-down-looking house. The first 65 seconds of this movie are devoted to production logos. Along with the New Line Cinemas logo, we also learn that this is a co-production with Paramount Pictures, as well as Michael Bay's Platinum Dunes. The situation arose because the two studios owned different rights to the franchise. Paramount Pictures owned the name Friday the 13th, and New Line Cinemas owned Jason and the rights to use the character. So when Platinum Dunes decided to pursue making this movie, they wanted to be able to use everything, and so they kind of had to negotiate with both studios to get everything that they needed. This kicks off an interesting period for the rights to this franchise. After this movie, there was talk of making a sequel, but since New Line owned the rights to the character, that held things up. However, New Line turned those rights over to Paramount in exchange for participation in Christopher Nolan's Interstellar. Then, of course, with the lawsuit that kicked up from Victor Miller, the whole thing really went south. Paramount had 5 years to make whatever Friday the 13th movie they wanted, but those rights lapsed at the end of the 5 years with no movie being made. However, everything is still tied up, so we're not on the horizon of any new movies for the foreseeable future.
The Platinum Dunes portion of this production is run by Michael Bay, and they're known primarily for their remakes of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Amityville Horror, The Hitcher, and A Nightmare on Elm Street. They eventually moved on to original content such as the Purge series and the Quiet Place movies. Their one outlier, though, is the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Out of the Shadows movie.
Right away, I kind of like the tone that this movie is setting up. Over the red tinged production logos, we get a little bit of a new theme from composer Steve Jablonsky, as well as a little hint of the famous Jason vocal sound effect of and it's creepy.
So I'm going to disagree with you there. I really feel like it's evolved into more of a like, and it could just be my ears, but I don't feel like I've heard the traditional like ma 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 for a while. Like I really think it's changed into something different, and again, it might just be me, but do you really hear it as the ki ma ma ma?
I mean, to the extent that I ever did, I have to force myself to hear it that way because, as we've said, I grew up thinking it was so. I think you're probably right. It's probably mutated a little bit to be even more vague than it was at the beginning when Harry Manfredini created it. Probably because people thought it was so it's just it's morphed, I'm sure, to some degree.
I'm just glad that they didn't change it into something new like J son J.
Michael Bay Michael Bay.
We see that it's June 13th, 1980 at Camp Crystal Lake. If we're to believe Pamela Voorhees' gravestone that we saw, I believe, in part 4 or 5, and I don't know why we wouldn't believe it, but her gravestone actually says she died on June 13th, 1979. And I know there's been some discrepancy because the movie came out in 1980, but the events took place in 1979. And so some movies are saying that she died in 1980 and it's back and forth, but her gravestone absolutely says 1979. And here we're seeing the events unfold in 1980.
Right. But I mean, this is a reboot. So the previous timeline no longer matters.
That's true.
They're referencing, right. This movie is referencing the year the original movie came out, not necessarily aligning with the dates that were depicted.
Okay, like this is the story that they are establishing, so, okay.
As we're getting this little flashback to this rainy night in June of 1980, it's interspersed with credits, which doesn't bother me as much this time because this is essentially a recap and they keep it really quick. So I feel like it's balanced more carefully than it was at the beginning of Jason Goes to Hell, for example.
I had the exact same thought and the exact same reference. When I was watching it, I was like, why? What is different about this one that I like that made the Jason Jason Goes to Hell so annoying? And I think it is because it's really brief, but I also think the way the credits are appearing, they actually are serving more as like scene transitions rather than interruptions. So like in Jason Goes to Hell, you're watching, I think, what was it, like the coroner just sitting there doing his report, and you're just watching one thing happen and it's constantly being interrupted by the credits. But this one, it's like you cut to a credit, it's really brief, and then you're at another scene or you're getting a different perspective. And so it's just, it's actually propelling the moment along a little bit better. So I was like, yeah, I'm okay with this. It's fine.
Mm-hmm. We're seeing an injured camp counselor stumbling through the woods carrying a machete. She's then ambushed by Pamela Voorhees, who in this version is dressed a little bit more like a locket-wearing grandma than an ass-kicking engine of murder.
I will say, though, that the counselor is wearing a shirt that says counselor across the back, and on the front it says Camp Crystal Lake. And I totally want that shirt. And I've looked around for like similar shirts, and I feel like a lot of times anytime it says like Camp Crystal Lake or something like that, it's always branded as Friday the 13th. Like it'll have like an actual like Friday the 13th logo at the bottom. And that just completely like takes away from the fun. Like I want something that seems like a genuine like camp counselor shirt, not a like merchandise.
Right. It's like when Underoos had a picture of the character instead of the character's outfit.
Right. So the counselor with the cool t-shirt has been cornered by this older woman, and she's saying, come here now, you're the last one, I've killed all the others, it'll be easier for you than it was for Jason. So they're kind of establishing that it's the same motivation for Pamela as it was in the original one, so they haven't really changed anything there.
At the beginning of that little segment, it sounded like you were going to slip into an Arnold Schwarzenegger impression from Predator when he's saying, come here, kill me, I'm here. One thing that this summary made me wonder is, are they compressing the timeline at all? Like, meaning, did Jason drown in 1979 and this is 1 year later? Or did he drown 2 days ago and she's taking vengeance immediately? They leave that kind of vague, and I wonder if they're kind of trying to simplify things.
Have you mentioned that there's a little boy watching them?
No.
Because that kind of answers the question. Sort of.
No, it doesn't.
Well, we know it wasn't 30 years ago.
Well, it never was 30 years ago. He drowned in 1957. She killed the first counselors in 1958.
But in 1980, a little boy comes out of the lake.
But we're not, that you can't, that doesn't, that never happened. From the standpoint of this movie, we're seeing what happened in 1958, we're seeing take place in 1980 instead. So did Jason drown a year previously like he did in the original timeline? I almost feel like we need a whiteboard. You have to pretend this is the first one you've ever seen. Nothing has ever happened before.
So you're saying that I can forget that Jason Goes to Hell exists?
Yes. And
I'm on
no dream demons.
Sweet. Okay.
No butt worms.
Okay.
No dream demons.
I like it.
Think of it like it's a whole new universe. This is an alternate universe. Nothing we've seen before took place. So nothing happened here in 1957 or 1958. We're seeing the beginning of the story in this series, in this reboot, taking place in 1980. So my question is, did Jason drown the previous summer the way it happened? You're staring at me blankly. I can't tell if I'm getting this across clearly.
No, I'm waiting for you to finish. I'm on board.
Yeah, I mean, like in Sean Cunningham's original movie, the movie opens with a flashback to 1958. Pamela kills those first two, Barry and Claudette, because a year earlier Jason had drowned. So now that never happened. This story is showing Pamela killing her first counselors in 1980. Did Jason just drown, or did he drown a year earlier. I think they're compressing it and making it more simple by saying he's been drowned a couple days at most.
I think so too. And the reason why I'm struggling to answer the question is because we do see him watching all of this chase and this confrontation transpire. Now that doesn't mean that he couldn't have drowned a year ago and now he's been hiding the whole time and he came out of hiding, but the fact that he's there seeing this all take place, I think he either did drown recently, or Pamela thinks he drowned, or maybe he didn't at all and she's just making this up as some like crazy motivation and he's following her around while she's doing all this. I don't know. But the short answer to your question is I think, yeah, he probably died very recently and this is her immediate response.
So this movie is kind of cleaning up the continuity a little bit compared to the original version of the story. Because, the old way, he would have been running around for a year. His mom thought he was dead, but he wasn't. He was still a little kid at that point.
And the counselor actually does. I mean, we keep calling her the counselor. I mean, do you even want to assume that it's Alice? Or she's never named.
Right, I wondered that. I mean, it's a little bit of a shame that they don't establish that, but I guess it doesn't matter because it could also kind of be Claudette in the sense that if this is, the first
first wave.
Yeah, then it was the kids, the counselors who were there when Jason drowned.
Well, that's why I was wondering, because Mrs. Voorhees, like, the counselor asks her, like, why are you doing this? And Mrs. Voorhees is like, you need to be punished for what you did to him. You let him drown. Jason was my son. Now, she could have said that to all 50 counselors or whatever that she killed, but we are only seeing this confrontation. So we have to kind of assume that she's blaming this particular counselor in particular. But again, it sounds like she's killed
Alice,
others.
And Alice had nothing to do with.
True. Yeah. But, it could just be delusion. So yeah, I just in my own head canon was calling her Alice because that's the story of the version of this story.
Pamela Voorhees.
Yeah, but she's never actually named, and I don't even think in the credits she's named as Alice. She's just named as like camp counselor or something.
Right. So as we've alluded to, little deformed Jason is watching from the woods as Pamela goes in for the kill, but is instead beheaded. And her fingers get severed in the swipe too, which was gross. So that's it for Pamela Voorhees. She was played by Nana Visitor, who was 51 when this was made. Betsy Palmer was 53 when she made the original movie. Nana Visitor was best known as the woman with the wrinkly nose on Deep Space Nine, and she was also in an episode of Battlestar Galactica.
Nana Visitor is also what you'd call someone going to see their grandma.
I'm sure she's never heard that joke before. The unnamed camp counselor was played by Stephanie Rhodes, who also voiced a cat in Adventures of Bailey, the Lost Puppy. Having saved herself by beheading Pamela Voorhees, the counselor leaves, and the shirt-wearing swamp boy Jason creeps out to his mother's head to pick up the locket and machete. My question is, which part of Pamela Voorhees' body did the locket fall off? Was it still attached to her neck stump, or was it looped around the part of her neck that was still on her head before it hit the ground and flew off?
I feel like she was wearing it around her neck, and then when the head got cut off, the head went flying, but then the body kind of falls like a tree, and as that was falling, the locket flew off of the neck and landed on the ground.
Yeah, that's probably true. It wouldn't have been high enough on her neck to go with the head. Even though he theoretically already knows what's inside the locket, he opens it, and we see one side is a picture of Pamela herself, and the other is a little portrait of presumably Jason. It's a little bald, kind of unusual-looking person. So unless Jason's dad was also very distinctive, this is probably a picture of Jason. He takes off, and we see that he's left Pamela's head behind.
That's when we get a voiceover from Mrs. Voorhees saying, "They must be punished, Jason." Oh, wait, do you want me to do this in the Arnold Schwarzenegger voice? So then we hear the voiceover from Pamela Voorhees. "They must be punished, Jason, for what they did to you, for what they did to me. Kill for mother."
Get to the chipper! Get to the chipper!
Whenever I see things like, the locket or like personal items of the Voorhees family, I like to picture them going to like Sears Portrait Studio and sitting down in front of some nice background, and like just the thought of like seeing Jason sitting on a stool and the photographer trying to get him to cooperate. Like, look at the camera, kid. What are you doing?
You're like, whoa! Okay, little boy, look at the whoa!
Stop drooling. We then cut to present day Crystal Lake. It's late afternoon, and we see 5 victims. I mean, kids, 2 girls, 3 guys hiking through the woods. One of the guys is saying that they need to keep their eyes open for mountain lions, and this is Wade. There's a guy wearing a bandana named Richie. He appears to be in a relationship with a girl named Amanda. Pulling up the rear is Whitney, who's lost in her own thoughts, and her boyfriend Mike. The group is using a map and a GPS device to find a crop of weed that someone had apparently planted in the woods. They're clearly lost, so they decide to kind of like set up camp for the night, and Richie and Wade will go look for this crop in the morning.
They move off the path, and they see some ruined totem poles, which was kind of a nice, creepy indication that there might be a camp nearby. And they also mention that there's a mine, which doesn't show up on the GPS. I found it interesting that Richie and Wade are there for this secret crop of marijuana, but they're acting like they're keeping it a secret from the other 3. So why are the other people there? What are they thinking they're doing? Just going camping for fun?
Yeah, I wondered that too. I think it was just kind of a camping trip or a search for weed under the guise of a camping trip. And it was more just like, hey, let's go to this spot. I've heard it's pretty cool. And everyone's like, sure, okay. And not really realizing that they have, ulterior motives for going to this particular location. But yeah, the rest of the group doesn't really seem to care at all or even know anything about it. So yeah, I think this is just a little plot for Richie and Wade. We cut to later that night, and Mike, Whitney, Richie, and Amanda are hanging around the campfire, and Wade comes running in to say that he found some broken down cabins and that it must be the ruins of an old camp. Wade tells them that the camp was closed down more than 20 years ago, so he seems to know where they are or what this camp could possibly be. So he starts to tell the story that a woman went nuts and killed a bunch of counselors for letting her son drown. But one of the counselors survived and cut off this woman's head. He then explains that Jason not only survived, but watched his mother being beheaded.
And he says that Jason came back. So Jason must have been rampaging around this area for the past 30 years. And there's even a reference to the cops looking for him. So I feel like there's a whole bunch of stuff that we're not seeing because there's 30 years of Jason running around.
Yeah, I was disappointed by that because, like, first of all, I liked the way that Wade was telling this story. It's obviously we'd seen Campfire Tales before in these Friday the 13th movies, but this one seemed very real because there was a lot of speculation and doubt from everyone that was listening to it. And he's like, no, really, I had a friend that went to the camp. And they're like, yeah, sure, you had a friend. He's like, no, really, I did. So he's like trying to add some like validity to this story. So I liked that part of it. But yeah, he alluded to some things where, he mentioned something about cops came to look for Jason, but we didn't get the end of that story. I'm like, well, what happened? I mean, like, did they just not find him or did the cops go missing? I feel like there's more story there. And he gets cut off. So it's not like it was done deliberately, but it's just unfortunate for us that we didn't get to hear those other stories because like you said, it seems like a lot of stuff has happened and we don't know what it is.
Wade mentions that the camp was named Crystal Lake. Richie laughs at this and says there are millions of crystal lakes, crystal geysers, crystal falls, etc. And while they're talking about water, Wade drops the fact bomb that urine is sterile and that you can drink it. That's not actually true. While healthy people likely have low bacteria levels in their bladder, bacteria is still present. So technically it's not sterile, but it is composed of 95% water. So in an emergency, you can drink it, but only in the short term, because the more you drink it and the more it's filtered through your system, the more concentrated it becomes. and eventually you'll just be flushing waste back into your kidneys, which can do some real damage. So, Brian, put down that glass of piss you're drinking.
But it tastes like asparagus. Whether it was the talk about drinking urine or all the stuff about Camp Crystal Lake, Whitney's a little spooked by all of this, so she and her boyfriend Mike go for a walk, and she tells him that she's probably not going to stay the whole time because she doesn't feel right being there so far away from her mom. So I guess there's something going on with her mom and she wants to be at home. But either way, Whitney has seemed pretty detached this whole time that we've seen her.
When they leave, there's some weird hostility about dick size from Wade. I get the sense that he doesn't really like anybody except Richie.
This is pretty common in like horror movies, but I really couldn't figure out the dynamic of this group. Wade in particular, he just didn't seem to fit in because, like Richie and Amanda were paired up and Whitney and Mike were paired up. And then there was just Wade. And I guess Wade's just there because he's the tracker, for the weed or whatever. But yeah, he's very hyper and he's kind of like going at people all the time.
He's definitely put forth as the nerd. He's wearing a Star Wars t-shirt that has an AT-AT on it, and he's excitable, and yeah, he's no suave ladies man like the other two guys, that's for sure.
So now it's just Wade and Richie and Amanda back at the campfire, and Wade is looking at his GPS device, and he says, and I quote, "The F Maris didn't sync up, and that's why he wasn't able to find the weed crop." And I wasn't really sure what he was saying, so I turned on the closed captioning, and it said that what he was supposed to say was ephemeris, which is basically the GPS didn't line up with the alignment of the stars in the sky. It hadn't like synced up yet to their exact location, so it was giving him false information. But it was just like this weird word that he threw out, and thanks to closed captioning, I was able to figure out exactly what he was talking about. But it's not ephemeris, it's ephemeris.
As he's explaining this to Richie, Amanda, who is out of Wade's eye line, is doing this weird little striptease, rubbing lotion all over herself. But she was established as being pretty worried about mosquito bites, so the fact that she goes topless like this is strange to me. Eventually, Wade catches on that there's a storm brewing in Richie's pants, so he takes off to find the weed so that Richie and Amanda can ride the Scrump train.
The thing I liked the most, though, there's a couple of things I liked about the striptease scene, but another one was that Richie's reaction was hilarious because this is all happening like behind Wade's back. I mean, they're sitting very close to each other, but Wade has his attention turned to the GPS and doesn't see what's going on behind him, but Richie does. And Richie's ignoring everything Wade's saying and just looking at Amanda, and he's just like mouthing things to her. He's like, "I'm gonna fuck you so hard. Oh my God." Like, he's just like, it's like all these like great facial expressions and just mouthing things. And it's hilarious. So as Richie and Amanda head to the fuck tent, Wade wanders off into the woods because he's convinced that the weed crop is nearby. He's got his earbuds in and he's listening to Night Ranger's Sister Christian, which should never be used in a movie ever again because it was already used in one of the single greatest scenes in motion picture history in Boogie Nights. Period. Do not use this song in a movie ever again.
He stops to pee and he sees he's standing right next to the weed crop. Bing pot. As he examines the plants, he looks up to see a hulking, hooded figure looming over him. Surging forward, there's a slashing sound, silencing Wade's scream. Presumably, he's dead. Wade was played by Jonathan Sadowski, who was in Live Free or Die Hard, and the Shit My Dad Says sitcom, as well as the ill-fated Lethal Weapon TV series.
Wade has obviously found the crop, and I'm wondering, like, do you think this is wild marijuana, or do you think that Jason plants it with the intention of luring potential victims? Because like word's going to get out eventually. Like, I guess someone would have to find it and be able to escape or get back to town to spread the word, so at least one person has been able to see it. But
well, and in fact that's exactly what happens because Donnie later on does find it. And
that's true. That's
an interesting question. I I don't think Jason is involved with the weed because his whole thing is people leaving him alone. He doesn't want people coming to his territory. He just kills them when they do. I don't know that he necessarily intends to lure people there. I could see where the weed is not natural. It was probably planted by some, weed growers, and Jason killed them, and so the weed is there because of them. But I'd be surprised if he set this as like a trap. I mean, how would he even necessarily know what weed is or
like how to cultivate it properly? He's out there with like black lights and
maybe he smokes the hell out of it. I mean,
he could be.
Jason could be cool. We don't know.
For medicinal purposes, of course.
Right. We know he has glaucoma in at least one eye. Mike and Whitney are exploring the abandoned Camp Crystal Lake. There are a couple of shots of them that I can't tell if they're intended to be point of view shots of Jason or not. It might just be the camera showing us where Mike and Whitney are going, but it's framed in such a way that it kind of seems as though someone is peering through the trees at them.
Yeah, and we've seen that in these movies before, and it can sometimes be inconsistent on what the perspective is supposed to be. I'm just going to guess that it's probably not Jason's perspective because I feel like this is happening at the exact time that Wade was just killed. So he's probably busy, cleaning up or whatever he's doing, and probably not already heading back to Camp Crystal Lake at this point.
You're probably right, but there are some travel time discrepancies in this movie that we'll get to. Mike and Whitney pass by some cabins and find a dilapidated house nearby. This segment ends on them approaching that building in the darkness. We have two deaths this time, Pamela Voorhees and Wade.
If you're interested in getting the GPS coordinates for my weed crop, tune in next week. But until then, you're all doomed.